It's day one of a brand new meta game. All seriousness, there's still just a ton to explore with the pre-OTA meta, so let's take a look at a bunch of decks that are a little bit off the beaten path from the first day of the new meta. This one is from Roram, and I played a pretty decent amount of it and felt like it was a pretty interesting thing. One of the dynamics that I'm noticing recently is that when I play Thanos lists, I really would like my Thanos deck to have some kind of combo-ish element that's really taking advantage of the energy cheat, and you'll see that in the Thanos lists we talk about, the gun Thanos lists we're talking about. These are definitely the kind of lists that are overemphasizing just like trying to cheat a bunch of energy, playing to the opposite of what Thanos typically is built for. Version 1 of Thanos is let's play a bunch of cheap scalers, and those decks don't actually get a lot out of his discount. These Thanos decks are building for the discount and trying to do things that multiply the discount and have expensive things in hand that are getting to be cheaper. I played a 2-cost normal Thanos with this deck. The other thing this deck is doing is just, here is a very large Sinister Six, and oh, by the way, fastball special adamantium infusion. That is just a very reasonable thing to do, but that's not all. Because you're a Sinister Six deck, when your cards die and they are marked as Sinister Six, they'll still merge from the graveyard. So you can do things like Venom them, or in the case of like maybe Thanos with a gun has the Sinister Six thing on him. I've had games where I throw that Thanos at an Iska with a fastball special. That kind of thing is a play you'll actually be making in a deck like this. This is not an intuitive deck. I struggled with it personally. It felt very difficult to figure out exactly what I was supposed to be doing. There were definitely some clunks and I had to snap aggressively with it, but it felt like there was enough balance between my multiple game plans that I didn't have to do any one thing. I didn't have to be a Sinister Six combo deck. I didn't have to be a Thanos deck. I could just play as the hand dictated. Now, there are definitely some things you're going to want to pay attention to. Mind Stone, obviously incredible. Your timing of King Atri with things like Namorita and Surge actually does kind of matter some of the time. And of course, you're going to want to pay attention to the fact that you don't want to draw big Thanos anytime early. You do not want your Sinister Six to involve big Thanos. So if you're sitting there looking at playing a Space Stone, think really hard before doing that on turn 1 or turn 2, because drawing big Thanos is very bad for your Sinister Six. From Jay Walla, we of course have a Cerebro deck. This Cerebro 3 list is actually secretly just the tech deck of the metagame. I mean, we're playing like 5 tech cards, but most important, we have Cosmo Mobius. Mobius is just very good generally. Cosmo is just very good generally. Being a shell that could play Cosmo, Mobius, Luke Cage, and then, oh, by the way, we have an armor that also blanks your Thanos. We have Scarlet Witch. That's particularly good right now. There are very few decks that are as good into Scorpion as a deck playing Luke Cage and Scarlet Witch, so you just get that matchup kind of for free. This is a very strong mid-range deck that has a lot of play to it. You can play both in and out of certain situations, but the biggest thing is you have armor and Cosmo to protect your stuff from getting blown up, because otherwise it would be kind of problematic to go against a Thanos with a Soul Stone. This does give you a lot of fairly polarized matchups. This is very much kind of a tech card deck, but it's also a deck that has a lot of power built into it. You can make a lot of points in your mid-range matchups depending on your reads on what interaction they're playing. One of the big things Thanos has done is make a lot of interaction be a lot more about the board. I'm seeing a lot more Juggernauts, a lot more Cosmos, and a lot less things that are going to actually do anything to a Cerebro. And that's a good spot for you to be in, because a lot of these Thanos decks, like we discussed, are these like low curve playing scalers kind of thing, and you have better scalers than they do. Now, you do have to be aware of location stuff, but there is quite a bit of resilience in a deck like this. From Doc Guapo, an attempt to use Joaquin Torres with the newly buffed Hawkeye to get a bunch of points. And this is particularly relevant to the Sinister Six version, which is why I'm showing the Sinister Six version. The other versions, it's not the most insane thing, but the Sinister Six version is really hard up for good units to have outside of the Sinister Six. And so what this Joaquin Torres stuff does is give you the ability to have a gigantic Hawkeye that you copy that is not part of your Sinister Six. And that is actually very crucial because what this deck really wants to do is win a lane with the Sinister Six. You'll go to like 38, 35, 40, something like that. And then you need to win another lane. And that's, the downside of Sinister Six. Having the ability to have a really big, cheap guy to copy is a really good start at winning that other lane. Really, a lot of the way this deck plays out is one of the lanes we're going to win with a big, giant Sinister Six, and the other lane is just, where do we think they're not going to go? We're picking and choosing the weakest spots. What we want to do usually is put Sinister Six on their strongest lane, and then the rest of their cards on the weakest lane. And getting to a point where we can win the weakest lane is kind of what the deck needs, because Sinister Six is so good at winning the strongest one. Those reads are pretty important to this, but the buff to Hawkeye is also pretty important. From Butt, I believe, based off of a deck that Ika made, this is a Zombies Pixie Thanos deck that is, again, really leaning into discount. One of the things that I've been noticing recently is I think a lot of the attempts at winning the Thanos mirror are, let me just cheat a bunch of energy because nobody's playing Mobius, and if I cheat a bunch of energy, I can go over the top of your scalers. So an increased importance for Psylocke Fractured Frontier, an increased importance for Thanos Greenstone. And to be honest with you, when I played this deck, like, there were cool stuff. There's cool stuff that Pixie does. Pixie's a cool card. She does cool stuff. It felt like a lot of the time I would care a lot more about Psylocke and Thanos Greenstone, and that's where the cool stuff would come from. Like, I was very much playing like not a Sarah deck, but like a ramp deck almost. Like, that kind of stuff was super meaningful, and I felt the same dynamic with the Roram Thanos. Like, again, Psylocke felt like just a really powerful card there because I had enough expensive guys that discounting them was actually particularly meaningful. This also just has a lot of beef in it in unexpected ways. There's just a whole lot of ways to go tall in this list that people are not going to be able to play around. And of course, there is the signature butt card Hulkling, which honestly, he was pretty good, but it's impossible for me to tell you that he will be pretty good because he was pretty good in a super limited sample size that is clearly not representative of what this card will be in the aggregate. That said, things like Venus into Jane Foster, Venus with the zombie procs, that stuff is legitimately good. It felt like a lot of the bad draws with this deck were still pretty solid, and the good draws with this deck were doing something really unfair. And that's a really interesting place for this archetype to be in. I don't know if it's necessarily going to get anywhere, but it honestly felt a lot better than I thought it would. Am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to put a Batroc deck on the day one decks list? I think that there's this pervasive belief, and it's not an untrue belief, that like Thanos is the best card in the game and you can't play any deck without Thanos. And I just want to talk about that a little bit here is really why Batroc is here. Because I'm still not convinced Thanos goes in Batroc, and I realize this might be one of those cases where, like, I'm a little off base, I'm overvaluing agency, but I really, really care about being able to play Juggernaut Cosmo. I care so much, and maybe the actual answer is I'm just supposed to bite the bullet, play all of these cards, and then just cut Hellion for Thanos. Maybe that's what's supposed to be happening here, but what I really want to get at is, like, Juggernaut Cosmo is such an additional layer of safety from just normal Cosmo that it's honestly impossible to even put in the same tier. There are so many matchups that I feel great about with Juggernaut Cosmo that I don't feel great about with one or the other. And if your Thanos deck is choosing that, and I'm seeing a bunch of Batroc Thanos decks doing like Venus and Mary Jane, and it's like, that's great. And that's a very valid thing for you to try to do to beat the other decks in your lane. Like, you're going a little taller than the people who are playing those cards. I get it. It makes perfect sense. I think long-term, it's not particularly great positioning-wise. And I think, like, that's really an attempt for them to introduce the, like, scaling upwards that I was trying to do with Psylocke and Energy Cheat. Like, how do I bend the Thanos mirror, go taller? but it really leaves you open to combo decks. Like, one Cosmo does not cover you against Scorpion. It just doesn't. A Cosmo and a Juggernaut, that does, right? Like, you are just so much better off when you can get that to happen multiple ways. And I just think that you really are costing yourself if you're choosing the stats over them. Although it is, maybe it pays you back in the matchups against other Thanos lists. From Mango, a Hydro Man list that is looking to play some Scar stuff. There are some questionable decisions here, but I do think that there might actually be something to this. The questionable decisions are mostly like, why are we a Quicksilver Domino list? And you look at the rest of the list and it's like, okay, I get it. Psylocke is always on. We don't actually have early game cards that we want to play in this archetype anyway. It lets us play a lot more expensive stuff, but it's still not something I necessarily like, even though it is helping Hydro Man to hit better targets more of the time because he's never hitting anything that costs less than 3. That's true. The Black Panther, I'm not really sure about. I feel like we're probably supposed to have a Cosmo in here. The Surtur, I'm not really sure about. But like this, there's something, right? Like Quicksilver means you always have a Cull Obsidian. There's stuff to this. There's things that exist here, but I'm not super convinced that this is amazing, but I am convinced that it's pretty close to the level of a competitive deck. Like, this did not feel nearly as bad as you might imagine that it would. It feels like it's doing reasonable stuff. And while I do think that it's kind of a booby prize to say that this might be better than the other Wiccan decks, because it's like, well, come on, right? Like, it did sort of feel to me like this is probably a little bit better than like the Wiccan Thanos lists, but that's largely just, I don't have a lot of respect for the Wiccan Thanos lists because despite all the energy that they managed to create, I think if they played a heads up, this deck would just have more points more of the time. That's not a good thing, right? It's just not a good thing. But there are some legitimately powerful things that this deck gets to do, even though I do think there are like 2 slots, the Black Panther and the Surtur, that are probably a little bit up in the air. Nimrod is a powerful and underrated combo deck. I kind of already sort of scraped it a little, so I'm not going to put Scorpion on the day 1 decks list because, like, come on, that's like, we all know what that deck is. But I don't think enough people know what Nimrod is, and Nimrod is definitely the kind of list that can go head to head with the other combo decks and actually take them down. Because what Nimrod is actually 2 decks. It's not just Nimrod. It's Nimrod with Shuri Black Panther. It's Nimrod with Symbiote Spider-Man Black Panther Arnim Zola. It's Nimrod with a lot of ability to double itself. And that means that you don't get locked into games where you're not going tall against the Scorpion deck, because you will lose those. But you have the ability to go taller than their combo some of the time. It's not all of the time, but you can do it sometimes. And that's pretty relevant. The other thing that this deck has is that it's a little less telegraphed than Scorpion, almost entirely because Tombstone exists. And I guess the third thing this deck has is I think it's a lot better at being a non-magic deck. It's not perfect at being a non-magic deck, but I think it's quite a bit better. There are some plays you have to think about, right? Like, you want to be able to not be on Symbiote Spider-Man versus a Thanos because he's going to Soulstone it. But if you want to be, but you typically want to be on Symbiote Spider-Man against non-Thanos decks. But largely, I just think that this is a solid, very underrated combo deck that is probably the second best in the game, but it's a really tough competition between it and Scorpion in my mind. Although, if you asked perennial rank 1 gamer Derek, he might tell you this is the second best combo deck in the game. I want to be super clear. If you play this deck and lose, you should blame Derek. You should not blame me. The way this deck works is trying to distribute a bunch of power from Living Tribunal that is created by repetitive activates. So, you want a Jocasta Prodigy with Invisible Woman activating Iska a bajillion times, and then that power being distributed thanks to Living Tribunal. The way you accomplish this is play Tribunal on 6 after magicking, and then you activate your combo by putting Iska in whatever lane your opponent has that you think is going to have the most points. Living Tribunal will affect Iska, so she'll see the Living Tribunal amount of points, and she'll keep doubling until that doesn't work anymore. This does work. I mean, like, the mechanics of it that I'm describing to you I don't know if the deck does. The other thing you're trying to do is activate Sparky a bajillion times on a Human Torch and then do the exact same thing, right? Like there are a couple of routes to this. I am largely concerned with things like, okay, location tech. I don't necessarily know how you do into Scorpion. I could believe it either way. And I think that this is the kind of deck where I'm not super confident in our ability to top deck out of it a lot. Like we need our cards. There's a little bit more pressure on us to get our cards at the right times than there are on some of the other combo decks because we need to be setting up and doing things pretty specifically. There are some worries here. But I do think that, I told Derek if he was willing to stake his reputation on it, I would be willing to put it in this video. And that's what he did. And that's what I'm doing. And I do think it is like kind of a crazy concoction that I haven't really seen anyone mess around with before. And he should be commended for that. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal. And I will see you in the next one.